Lesson 8.5, Solve Problems Involving Circumference of a Circle. In this lesson, we're going to learn about how to relate the distance around a circle and the distance across a circle. So we'll be talking a lot about the parts of a circle and how they relate to calculating the circumference, or how to use the circumference to calculate a diameter. How does the circumference of a circle relate to the length of its diameter? Example 1. Describe parts of a circle and find circumference to solve problems. Mark recently replaced his front bicycle wheel. How far does the bike travel with each revolution of his new front wheel? First, let's notice in the picture that they tell us the diameter of the bike wheel. Remember that the diameter is the distance across the circle through its center. So this distance right here, going from edge to edge on the circle and through that middle, is called the diameter. Next, we need to know the definition of a revolution of the front wheel. So a revolution is one complete turn. So as the wheel travels around as you're riding a bike, the top of the wheel, when it returns to that same position at the top of the wheel again, has gone around one revolution. Next, we need to look for the relationship in order to find the circumference of a circle. Now, what we know, or may remember from previous work, is that pi is the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. So that ratio is C divided by D. And that's what pi as a number is equal to. Now, pi is a number that we estimate, and we typically estimate it at 3 1400ths. Now, by solving the ratio C divided by D equals pi, and multiplying both parts of that by D, you end up with C equals pi times diameter, which is the formula to find the circumference of a circle. So now we're going to use that formula, C equals pi times D, in order to find how much one complete turn of that bicycle wheel is. In other words, the circumference, which is the distance all the way around that circle. Okay, so circumference means all the way around that circle. So if I start here and I travel going counterclockwise and I go all the way around and then I end up back where I started, that is the circumference, which is the same thing as that revolution of the wheel. So we're going to use the diameter of 26 inches, which they tell us here in the picture. And we're going to substitute 26 in place of D for diameter. You see that right there. So the circumference is exactly 26 times pi. Remember, pi is not an exact number when we use that decimal approximation. So the exact value is 26 times pi as an irrational number. To get an approximate distance, or something extremely close, we can use 3 1400ths as the pi number. So 26 times 3 1400ths ends up being 81 6400ths. So the distance around the wheel, or one revolution, each revolution, is about 81 6400ths. Now let's look at the Triack question. What is the circumference of the rim of a basketball hoop with a radius of 9 inches? So 9 inches is only half the distance across that circle, and what we really need here is we need a diameter, or the distance all the way across the circle and going through that center. So instead of a radius, we need the diameter. Well, from the center of the circle to any point on the circle is an equal number, because that's what makes it a circle, is from that center point we can go out in any direction, and the distance from that center point to the edge of the circle is always 9 inches. So if the radius equals 9 inches, then the diameter is twice that radius, or 18 inches. Next, we're going to use that information and an approximation for pi in order to find the circumference of that basketball rim. Okay, so first we multiply the radius by 2 to get the diameter, which is 18 inches. Then we're going to multiply the diameter by 3 14/100, which is the approximation for pi, to get a circumference of how many inches? So what does C equal? The circumference of that circle is about 56 52/100 inches. In example 2, we are going to work on finding the diameter by using the circumference. Kayla and Theo got on the Ferris wheel shown. About how high will they be at the top of the Ferris wheel? So what we're going to do is use the circumference formula to find the diameter of the Ferris wheel. Okay, in other words, we want to know the distance from the bottom all the way up to the top of that Ferris wheel. So we want to know how high or how tall that Ferris wheel is if we know the circumference, and they've given us that number here. So we're going to use this and set up a problem using the circumference formula and see if we can solve to find the diameter. So there are two ways to do this. The first way is to use the decimal approximation for pi. Next, we're going to substitute in the circumference, 220 feet, for the C variable. The pi number, we're going to put the 3 14/100 in place of pi, and D is the variable that we're trying to solve for. So this is a multiplication equation here on the right side, so we're going to solve it by dividing both sides by that 3 14/100, or the pi number. So the circumference divided by pi is going to give us a diameter approximation of 70 feet, which means Kayla and Theo will be about 70 feet above the ground when they are at the top of that Ferris wheel. Now, a second way of doing this is to use a different approximation for pi. 22/7 is another way to estimate pi. And if you divide 22 divided by 7, you would get the same approximation of about 3 14/100. But it's in a fraction form, which sometimes makes it a little bit easier to manipulate if your other numbers are also fractions. In this case, in order to solve your equation, after you substitute in for your circumference and your pi value, you are going to multiply by that reciprocal number, which is 7/22, in order to solve for diameter. Remember, when you do that, you're doing 7 times the 220, and then you're going to divide by 22. And you still get 70 as the approximation for diameter. We're going to go ahead and skip example 3 and the try it that goes with it. We'll move on to the key concept and try some problems together on the next page. Make sure you study the key concept. Remember, circumference is the distance around the circle. It can be calculated using the formula C equals pi times D, or C equals 2 times pi times R. Remember that the radius of a circle is half the length of the diameter. The radius only goes from the center of the circle to the edge, whereas the diameter goes all the way across. Also, don't forget to estimate pi. Pi is that ratio between the circumference and the diameter, which is used approximately at either 3 14/100 as a decimal or 22/7 as a fraction. Next, let's take a look at questions 4 and 5. Number 4 asks us, what is the circumference of a circle with a radius of 5 inches? So in this question, we're asked to find circumference. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my two formulas, C equals pi times D, or C equals 2 times pi times r. Which of these two formulas should I use if I'm given the radius? Well, the answer is I can use either of them. But in both cases, I need to change the radius. Okay, that radius number here is 5 inches. I need to change that into a diameter. So remember, it takes 2 times the radius to make the diameter. So if I use C equals pi times D, I have to do that calculation ahead of time. So the circumference I'm trying to find, pi is 3 14/100, and the diameter is 10. Or if I use the formula C equals 2 times pi times r, the 2 goes in front, the pi would come next, and then the radius, which is 5. And if you'll notice here, in all these cases, you end up getting the same answer. So calculate that, pause the video, and then come back and check your answer. In both cases, you should get the circumference is equal to about 31 4/10 inches. Now let's try number 5. What is the diameter of a circle that has a circumference of 10 99/100 feet? So in this problem, we are looking for the diameter, which means I need to use the formula C equals pi times D. Now remember, D is the part that I'm looking for. The circumference they tell me, so I'm going to put 10 99/100 in place of C. And I know what pi is as an estimated number. That's 3 14/100 times the D. Now I'm going to solve this like an equation. Okay, I've got multiplication in my equation, so I need to divide on both sides by the 3 14/100. And by doing that, I get D all by itself, and D equals 10 99/100 divided by 3 14/100. So what do you think that is? If you calculated correctly, the diameter would be 3 5/10 feet. Now let's try numbers 7 and 8. We'll do these two together, and then I'll have you try numbers 9 and 10 on your own. Number 7 says, find the circumference of the circle. Use pi as part of the answer. Well, this is where we go back to our two formulas. And we have to identify what information did they give us in the problem. Well, in this case, they gave us the distance across, which is the diameter. So the diameter equals, in this problem, 7 centimeters. So the formula that I'm going to use is C equals pi times D. Since I need to use pi as part of my answer, I'm not going to substitute in a value. Instead, I'm going to multiply pi times that diameter, and I'm just going to simplify my answer. In algebra, we always put numbers in front of symbols or letters. In this case, the 7 comes first, and the pi comes behind it. So the circumference of this circle is simply 7 pi. Now, that's an exact answer because we have not substituted in an approximate value for pi. Number 8, find the circumference of the circle. But this time we're going to use 3 14/100 for pi. Round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so it does tell me how to put my answer. Again, they have given me a diameter, a distance all the way across. That equals 20 feet. So my circumference is going to be equal to pi, which I'm going to substitute in the 3 14/100, times the diameter, which is 20. Calculate that and come back and check your answer. In this case, the circumference is 62 8/10 feet. We don't actually have to do any rounding because we used an approximate value for pi that doesn't cause that. Now I'd like for you to take a look at numbers 9 and 10. Notice that these two problems are very similar to questions 7 and 8. But the biggest difference is that in these two problems, they give us a radius number, not a diameter. So we either have to use the formula c equals 2 times pi times radius, or in order to use pi times diameter as our formula, we would have to double the radius to get that distance all the way across. So you choose how you want to solve those and come back when you're done and we'll check answers. All right, go ahead and check your answers and work for numbers 9 and 10. And come see me if you have any questions about how those answers came about. Next, we're going to try number 11. Find the diameter of a circle with a circumference of 27 centimeters. Use 3 1400ths for pi. So start by writing out your formula. We know that we're going to be looking for d, which is diameter. They tell us that circumference is 27, so we'll put that in place of c. And they also tell us that pi, we're going to use the 3 1400ths. So what we're looking for is the d number. We're going to divide both sides by the 3 1400ths. And do that now on your calculator and see what you get for a diameter. And then come back and check your answer. In this problem, the diameter ends up being a very long decimal when you do that division. But it does tell us to round to the nearest tenth. So that means we have an approximation of 8 6/10 centimeters. Next on this page, let's take a look at number 12. The distance around a meteor crater is 9,687 feet. Find the diameter of the crater. Use 22/7 for pi. Round to the nearest tenth. So let's take a look at our formula. This time we're looking for the diameter. So c equals pi times d. They tell us the circumference, 9,687 feet, and they tell us to use 22/7 for pi. So remember, to solve this with the fraction involved, we have to multiply by that reciprocal fraction, which is 7 over 22. So the 7's will cancel, the 22's will cancel. And then I'm going to multiply on the left side also by 7 over 22. So the multiplication looks like this. 7 times 9,687 divided by 22. That's going to equal my diameter. So go ahead and do that calculation and tell me what you get. Remember to round to the nearest tenth. You should get about 3,082 2/10 feet for that diameter. Remember, we're looking at the distance all the way across that crater, and that's not a distance that you can exactly measure by hand. You would have to do the circumference of that crater and use that circumference to find the diameter. Now it's your turn to try some questions on your own.